All set.
Okay. Is it? Can you? Okay, great. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, I see you.
Shauna, you can see it? You're good? We're good? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So good morning,
Yeah.
everybody. Again, thank you so much to Sarah Nadara and the Holocaust Resource Center at Kean for having us here today and for giving Shauna and I the privilege to introduce Maud Dahme. Maud is an incredible human being. She is somebody who continually inspires both Shauna and I and everybody she comes in contact with to be a better person. And so we're here to tell you a little bit about her, but also about how Shauna and I are connected to her, and just to give a quick intro, and you'll hear a lot more from her personally. So Shauna and I met a few years ago at a Facing History and Ourselves workshop over the summer. And we have been teaching these Diversity Council courses at Kean ever since. And these Diversity Council courses, you know, some of our student or teacher students are out there watching this. So thank you guys for being here too. And these courses, Teaching the Holocaust and Teaching Prejudice Reduction, are free, tuition-free courses for teachers that teach in districts that are Diversity Council members. And you can talk to Sarah and Adara and they can give you more information on the courses themselves. But these courses have been one way for Shauna and I to connect and to be able to teach about our passions, you know, the Holocaust and prejudice reduction, to teachers and be able to get the word out there so that they could bring it back to their students in their classroom. And we've together, I think, have taught over 100 or so teachers at this point, who have then gone on to bring this education back to their classroom. And now having access to Maud, it's an incredible way to keep the connections going and to bring Holocaust education to so many different schools all over the state of New Jersey. And getting to have Maud's voice in there now is really, truly a privilege. And we talked about for years doing this trip that the New Jersey Holocaust Commission runs every year, that Maud has been leading since 1999, correct, Maud? It's been 20 years?
Yes, it has.
Right, so for 20 years she's been running this trip, and Shauna and I talked about it for a few years already, and we decided last summer that we were just gonna make it work. And thankfully, through the Holocaust Resource Center, we were really able to make our dreams come true on this trip. And ever since, I think, you know, anybody here that was on the trip with us, I saw Kim and Deb out there, can attest to the fact that this trip is really a once in a lifetime thing. And really Maud is what makes it so incredible. Having somebody with you every step of the way to tell her story and bring you to all of the sites is really an incredible experience. And I apologize because I have this on my iPad. My Chromebook wasn't working. I don't know if we're going to be able to see as many pictures as we would have liked to have shown you, but I can send this presentation to Sarah and she can get it out to everybody. So Shauna is going to tell you a little bit more about our incredible, fearless leader, Maud Dahme.
Thank you, Jackie. I'd like to read something that I wrote about our experience and about Maud. Elburg is a medieval village in the Netherlands, right out of a children's storybook. I've been thinking about Elburg and about our visit there last summer with Maud. It's hard now to imagine it a wartime village with a curfew, Nazi soldiers patrolling, and the people starving, but that's what it was during World War II. This was one of the places Maud and her sister Rita were hidden during the war. When we visited Elburg with Maud on a picture-perfect July day, after she treated us to delicious, authentic Dutch pancakes, we were brought to the recently created Jewish museum constructed in Elburg's former synagogue. It has stayed with me that the people of this town created a museum dedicated to Jewish life before and during World War II, in which Maud's story is a featured story. The story of Elberg is a good representative of many of the stories of the Holocaust. In this one village, there were both righteous people willing to risk everything to help others, and there were people who, as Maud puts it, were the opposite of righteous. Being there with Maud was like traveling with a celebrity, and rightfully so. We got private access to the museum and a walking tour of the village. When Maud speaks to young people, she speaks about love and caring, acceptance, and also about forgiveness. The work of the town of Elberg in creating the small museum and maintaining the Jewish cemetery represents the forgiveness and reconciliation that a community can embark upon to heal and grow. It is a beautiful thing to see, and Maud's influence helped to create that spirit and keep it alive. Maud doesn't sugarcoat her story. In her life, she's experienced both the unimaginable horrors that humans can inflict upon each other and the unimaginable sacrifices for others that humans are capable of. In her book, Chocolate, The Taste of Freedom, Maud says, "We need to forgive in order to continue to live. We cannot live carrying hate." It is this quality that makes her remarkable to me. I have often thought that I could be more like Maud in my own life. Maud's public life has been dedicated to service to others, working hard to create change in her community and education, particularly about the Holocaust. She travels extensively and twice a year journeys to the sites of the Holocaust. Maud has taken hundreds of New Jersey educators on this life-altering trip. Maud loves a good joke. She tells great stories and is a master of photobombing. She clearly enjoys life to its fullest. When people ask me if the trip to see the sites of the Holocaust was sad, I say yes, and it was uplifting and educational and inspiring and beautiful. And we laughed our heads off and we cried our eyes out and we had a blast and we are forever changed. It was like life. Maud embodies this complexity of life. The day we visited Auschwitz, the weather seemed appropriate. It was the first rainy and gray day of our trip. The experience was somewhat as I expected. I tried hard to be present and feel what I was feeling. I looked to Maud, who was getting emotional as she read the lyrics to John Lennon's Imagine. Later that evening, after a quiet bus ride, we met again for dinner in a loud and raucous restaurant. Maud had arranged for 2 young students to join us, and as the wine flowed, we were loudly laughing, smiling, and enjoying a wonderful meal together. As I watched Maud go between the tables, making sure we are all happy and enjoying ourselves, I realized that she was demonstrating that despite the earlier sadness and stories of pain and suffering, we too can relish in the moments of joy. In this scary time, I'm trying to be more like Maud. I feel honored and grateful to have had the opportunity to get to know Maud and travel with her. Maud has impacted many lives, including my own, for the better, and I am so proud to introduce her today.
Thank you.
Maud, you really are so special and you mean so much to us, and I know to a lot of other people out there. Again, I'll send this presentation so you guys could look through some more of our pictures, but the connections that we made because of Maud, the lessons that we learned because of Maud, and really, like Shauna said, trying to embody Maud and her passion and zest for life and the understanding that she has for respect above all else is something that we both have been trying to fulfill. So Maud, thank you for telling your story. Thank you for changing how we teach the Holocaust in our classroom. Thank you for broadening our horizons outside the classroom walls too, to allow us to bring these experiences to our students. And thank you for all that you do to ensure that educators are armed with the tools and resources necessary to combat anti-Semitism, hate, and prejudice of all types in our classrooms. It's really because of you that future generations will benefit from such an education. And hopefully, if they all embody Maud like we're trying to do, be kinder, more empathetic humans as a result. We love you.
Thank you so much. I don't know what to say at this point. All those wonderful accolades. Thank you. Can I start now?
Yes, you may.
Okay. The one thing before I even want to say anything, you all talked so much about the trip that we did. And most of it has been possible for teachers because of the New Jersey Education Association, who has helped to sponsor teachers to be able to go on this trip. So that's been a wonderful thing. And thank you, NJEA, because many of you who are listening, who are teachers and on the trip, this was a once in a lifetime opportunity to see the sites. Now, I understand there's also students listening.
Yes, undergraduate and high school students.
Okay, all I see is HRC Kean. I see myself all the way on the top. Okay. Well, usually when I speak to students and anyone, I usually started with this. I came to the United States in 1950. I never really talked about who I am, where I came from. Fortunately, I learned to speak English. I did not speak English when I came here. English pretty well, however, with a limited vocabulary, but no one asked me because I had no accent, where are you from? It wasn't until something that appeared on 60 Minutes. And on March 29th, 1981. And this appeared, you know, CBS, they have the program, and then afterwards, they show you parts of letters that people wrote in relating to the previous week's story. And they had a story about Wallenberg, who saved many, many Jews. I was watching the following week, and at the end of that, this is what appeared. Quote, the Jews of Europe were not exterminated in gas chambers. The gas chambers were wartime propaganda fantasies, unquote. And it was signed by someone in Annandale, New Jersey, where I was living at the time, and I happened to know this person. I was shocked. And it was then when I decided that I have to start to speak about what I experienced. At that time, many stories and films were written on people who survived the concentration camps, but there was very little about children or people who were hidden. And I started to speak and tell my story. My story begins in a town called Amersfoort in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, I saw the year appear on the screen when I was born. I will not repeat that. But it was my mother and father. My mother had originally come from Germany. Her father, my German grandfather, was a cantor at the synagogue in Frankfurt am Main. And she, as maybe she was around 19, 20, had come to the Netherlands for a party. And she met my father. And they fell in love. And they got married. And she became a Dutch citizen and, of course, was living now in the Netherlands. My dad worked for his father. My Dutch grandfather had a restaurant at the train station in Amersfoort, and he also had a kiosk. Now, a kiosk is not like the kiosk you know here. A kiosk was more like a newspaper stand. At that particular train station in my hometown, he had a building, and they were selling magazines, cigars, cigarettes, candy. My dad learned to be a chef so that he could work the restaurant for his father. I was born, and 2 years later, my sister Rita was born. We had a very idyllic life, happy, until 1940. On May 10th, on 1940, we woke up, planes in the sky, tanks moving into the Netherlands, soldiers marching in. We were shocked. The Netherlands had been neutral in the First World War and was going to be neutral in the Second World War. But Hitler paid no attention to this, and we were invaded by the German army. The Dutch were shocked, as I said, and for 5 days, the Dutch armed forces fought this mighty German army. On May 10th, 5 days later, Hitler came in and bombed our biggest port city of Rotterdam and said to the Dutch, if you do not surrender now, I'm going to bomb every city in the Netherlands. The Dutch surrendered. Our life had been very idyllic up until that time, though we had seen what was happening in Germany. As a matter of fact, my parents had been so concerned, this was probably around 1937, 38, that they decided that my German grandparents, my mother's parents, should really get out of Germany. It wasn't safe. So my dad took the train and went to Frankfurt am Main and picked up my grandparents. My German grandfather had been arrested by the Nazis 3 times already, but each time somehow he was able to be released. So they were quite willing to leave, as so many other German Jews came to the Netherlands. They had friends, they had relatives, thinking we would all be safe. So many German Jews arrived who didn't know anyone. And the Dutch government really didn't know what to do with the influx of all these immigrants. So they took a piece of land in the northern part of the Netherlands and built a whole bunch of barracks. And this is where they housed all these people who had no place to go. And it became a community because there were teachers among there. They created a school for the children. There were physicians. They created a little hospital. The place was called Westerbork. My parents continued to work. My father continued to work, but all of a sudden, yes, every Jew in the Netherlands was the very first thing, has to be registered. So who would have ever dreamt what the end result would be? And many, many Jews, including my family, we all registered. Not realizing now, of course, looking back on it later, they had our names, addresses, everything. Well, life started to get very difficult for us. The Queen, Wilhelmina, left the country and set up a government in exile in England. And Hitler chose Dr. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, an Austrian Nazi, to now be the commandant of the Netherlands. And then very quickly, regulations started to come out against the Jews in the Netherlands. My father's and grandfather's business had to take in a Jew. It was interesting because I found out recently that my grandfather was an officer in the which is like a chamber of commerce of my town. They said to him, goodbye, we don't want you. And this was beginning to happen more and more. People were being fired because they were Jews. Everybody in the federal government or town government who was Jewish was fired. We had many restrictions. We had to, as did every Dutch person actually, had to turn in their radios. But for the Jews, we also had to turn in our cars. My mother was told when she could go shopping. These are the hours for Jewish housewives and the places they may go and buy food. So life became very restricted. I had just turned 6 years old in 1942, and another restriction came out, and it said everyone who is Jewish has to wear the yellow star. And inside it said J-O-O-D. That's a Dutch Jood, which is a Dutch word for Jew. Anyone who was 6 years old and older had to have this on their clothing every time they stepped out the door. Of course, you know, I'm being 6 years old. And my mother, by the way, had to buy these for 1 guilder each. A big piece of material with the stars on it, how many she wanted. And then she could cut them out and sew them on. But each star was paid for by her. We could not use public transportation. It became very, very difficult. And we're Dutch citizens, just like everybody else. And I remember one day that my Dutch grandmother was in the hospital and we had no car. There was no public transportation. We couldn't take a bus. And the hospital was at the other end of town. I remember walking through a park because my mother said, let's take a shortcut. Now, we were all wearing our stars, including my sister, who didn't have to. But when she found out that I had one, of course, she wanted one too. neither one of us realizing what it meant. So we were all walking through, just before we got to the park, my mother said, let's take off our jackets. It's kind of hot. It was June. So we did. Of course, by doing that, we took our stars off. And I remember seeing signs, forbidden for Jews, at the park entrance. Many restaurants had signs, Jews not wanted. It became a very, very restricted life. Excuse me. On a Sunday morning, the rabbi of our synagogue, we had one synagogue in the town of Amersfoort, the rabbi called the whole congregation together, and my parents went, and he read a letter to the congregants. And the letter was from the Dutch commandant saying, we have wonderful news for you. We're going to have trains on this particular date at this time, leaving from our train station to take you away from the war scene. Now you have to realize the war had broken out. My town is in the middle of the country, very important for the railroad. So there was a lot of bombing by the Allied planes at our train station. And of course, they could not, bombs missed their target. This was in the 1940s. And so it became very, very dangerous. I remember the sirens going off, having to go in the basement. So they said, this will be wonderful. It'll take you away from all this war. And it'll be wonderful because where you're going, the trains will be going east. And not saying where, just east. And the fathers can get jobs and the children can continue their education. And as soon as everything is over, you come back and we will have, everything will be in your house. You just return home with everything there. And everybody is looking like, what does that mean? My parents had no idea. No one did. There had been rumors, and there had been young men taken to work in factories in Germany, but we had no communications, no newspapers, no radio. So my parents were just shaking their head as the others. So on the way home, they stopped at a friend's house. A Christian friend. We were not allowed to visit our Christian friends either anymore, nor were they allowed to visit us. So they snuck in his house. And this gentleman, his name was Kees van Zwol. My mother thought maybe he knows something. He was pretty much connected with the community. So they snuck in the house and they walked in, and my mother was going to ask him, and she happened to look on his desk and she saw that same letter. She thought, how come he has this letter? Is he working with the Nazis or not? So she got up enough nerve and she said, Kees, how come you have this letter? And he said, well, I will tell you. I'm working for the resistance, and we were able to get a copy of this letter. And my parents said, oh, well, what does it mean? Where do we go? So he said, we're not sure. However, he said, we have been going all through the Netherlands asking Christian families, would they be willing to hide Jewish children if the need should arise? And he said, many, many people came forward. And I have an address for your daughters. He said, I can't tell you who they are. I can't tell you where they live. But they agreed that they would take care of your daughters. So he said, I have to know very quickly, because not right now, but you have to let me know within a couple of days and let me know what you decide to do. You know, my parents went home and talked about it. And I realized as a mother and grandmother, but as a mother, to have to give up your children, not knowing where they're going to be, not knowing if you will ever see them again. But my parents, for the love of us, said yes. They contacted Mr. van Zwol, and my parents were told where to bring us. Now, my mother tried to explain this to me. She was packing a little suitcase for my sister and I with some clothes. And she said, well, you're going to go on a little vacation. Isn't that wonderful? And the only thing I think that Mr. van Zwol had told my parents at that time was that these people lived in on a farm. So my mother was oh, it's so exciting. You're city girls, you're going on a farm for a couple of weeks. And while you're visiting there, Dad and I are going on a vacation too. And in about 2 weeks, we'll come and pick you up again. So my sister and I were all excited to be able to go to a farm. And I remember that day so well, the day that my dad took us to this house. He was told where to bring us. And it was the house of a gentleman named Jan Canis, who also worked for the resistance and lived in my town, not too far away from my house. And I remember going, my dad had the little suitcases, my sister and I were on our tricycles. And when we got to the house, he said to me, take really good care of your sister and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. I don't remember why I was told why we were going to that particular house, to that family, but unfortunately no one is alive anymore to tell me. So my sister and I went in the house, and it was a wonderful family. Two of the daughters of this gentleman actually joined us on a trip last summer in the Netherlands, but we had dinner with them and they put my sister and I to bed. And I remember that about 2 o'clock in the morning, he came in the room. He said, hurry up, wake up, get dressed. This is what he had to do. We got dressed. He, Mr. Canis, was going to bring us to the family who were willing to take us in. However, we couldn't use the train. First of all, because the trains at the train station, the people at the train station knew us because we were little girls. Of course, of the two businesses there, everybody around there knew the Pepper Girls. So a decision was made that we should leave from the next town. So that's why we had to get up in the middle of the night. I was given a flashlight, and I remember walking through the woods to the next town. And I remember picking blueberries. And I know he got very upset with me because I felt I was so big. I had my own flashlight. And of course, they were all wild blueberries. I kept picking them. But eventually, we did get to the next town by daylight. And we took a train. And yes, indeed, we arrived. I don't remember how we got from the train station to the farmhouse. But I remember arriving at the farmhouse and Mr. Canis left. And it was a very nice family. It was an elderly couple. They were in their 60s, no children. But that very first day we arrived, and you have to imagine what it's like. It's war. All the farms were along a major highway with the houses facing the highway. In the back were all the fields. And this was summer. So all the grain had not been cut. So it was very busy because everywhere there were German soldiers walking around. There were nothing but tanks and German vehicles moving up and down the road. So I don't know why, but they decided we should go hide in a wheat field. They probably told me we were going to play a game. I don't remember, but I remember them telling me to go into this wheat field and how to walk in, not straight because I would flatten all the wheat, to zigzag in and just stay there. And I guess I don't know, other than my sister and I took my sister by the hand. She's 4, I'm 6. And we walked into this wheat field, and they also handed me an umbrella just before. And we went in and they said, it looks like it's going to rain. So here's an umbrella. We were not in this field very long. And of course, we were little and the wheat was over our heads, so no one could see us. And it started to rain. So I opened the umbrella. And then my sister started crying because she wanted her mommy. She hadn't seen her mommy since the day before. So they came and took us out of the wheat field because how obvious was this? An umbrella sticking up in the middle of a wheat field and 2 children crying. So they took us in the house. And that very first evening in the farmhouse, some of their relatives came over just to meet us. And I felt very big because they were asking me questions, and I was, I know I was very proud of the fact. I said, I've learned how to spell my name. I can spell my name. I can even write my name. Oh, and I'm so grown up that I get to wear a star, but I'm not wearing my star. So then they sat me down after these few people left. They sat me down. I'm 6.5 years old and told me why I was there. That I'm never, ever to tell anyone who I really am. That the story is going to be this couple were my aunt and uncle. We were nieces, their nieces who had been bombed out of the city, and we were now living with them. And you say that to anyone who asks you, who are you? And if you don't, soldiers are going to come and take you away and kill you. Now, I was scared to death. I'm only 6.5 years old. And you cannot go outside until you know exactly what your story is, because someone will ask. So, and besides all that, they spoke a dialect there, which my sister and I didn't. So that explained that we were from the city of Arnhem, I think they said, so that we would not be noticed. So after a while, I was able to know the story, who I now am. And it was kind of cute because uncle in Dutch is oom and aunt is tante, but my sister couldn't say tante and called her Tanny. All our lives, she has always been Tanny to us. So we went with them on the fields, and the whole area there, I found out after the war, so many Jews were hidden there. They're very, very religious. They call, I guess here you would call it like the Bible Belt, very religious evangelists and really caring for their Jews. We, after church one Sunday, we went to visit Tanny's or aunt's widowed sister on another farm. We were so surprised because who was hiding on that farm? My Jewish kindergarten teacher and her husband, someone we knew. So every Sunday after church, they would take us there. So she was beginning to teach us how to read and write. And one day we didn't go anymore. I never saw them again. I never knew what happened until maybe 10 years, 20 years ago, I found out what happened. Someone, of course, there were so many good people, but there were always those who collaborated with the Nazis. Someone revealed their hiding place. A truck arrived on Aunt's sister's farm, and they came in, the German soldiers came in and searched the farmhouse. They found nobody. And someone told me that they had heard they had been very polite. Then they went outside, and they went exactly to one of the haystacks and went in there and discovered that's where they were hiding. So they knew all along that my teacher and her husband were hiding in that haystack. They took them and they said to Aunt's sister, we're taking your son. He was about 19, 20 years old. And she said, no, you have to take me. This is my farm. We're taking him. So they took the three of them and they brought them to the city Zwolle, which was not too far away, where they had set up like a little center where they were checking everybody in because they were finding more and more Jews into this place. The son somehow was able, through some connections, they let him go. My teacher and her husband were there, many other Jews who had just been found. One night, Dutch Nazis came into this facility, took my teacher, her husband, and 4 other men, and took them to a park in that city, gave them shovels, told them to dig. Of course, they all realized what was going to happen. And when they were done, they shot all 6 of them and covered it up. Now, as you know, the Nazis kept very accurate records. So they were checking and they were missing 6 people. Where are they? So finally, they discovered what had happened. They made these collaborators go out there, dig up the 6 bodies so they could put them on a train, which they did, and sent them to Bergen-Belsen. and threw them, once the train arrived, threw them in a mass grave. Now they finished. They decided they know now they had found who they were looking for, and they can take their names, mark them on the record that they had been discovered and died. Life became difficult because even though it was a farm, we were able to grow some vegetables, and we had milk every day. We milked the cows, put the milk to be pasteurized on the street in containers, come back empty. It was confiscated. German soldiers used to come on the farm and say, that pig looks healthy, we're taking that one. And it was just very difficult. But we were fortunate enough in the beginning of the war to have some food. But things got worse and worse for the country, and especially in the winter. And people, they were called trekkers. They were just moving from town to town trying to find food. I remember some mornings waking up at the farm and going outside and finding bodies of people who had frozen to death. They were out there looking for food. So it was very, very difficult. One day they sent my sister and I away for the day and to another relative, and we came back, and I knew something was different. And so I started being inquisitive, starting asking questions. I was maybe 7.5 at the time. And finally they said, okay. So at dusk, they took me outside, and they took me to one of the barns that had like an extended roof. And underneath that, we kept all our firewood because there was no gas or electric. And there was a lot of wood also because Tony's or aunt's brother also lived with us. He was a wooden shoemaker. And so they looked around. Now you have to realize it's just an extended roof, so it's all open. And they started clearing away the wood and kept looking up to make sure that they were not seen. And then I saw a trapdoor. So they opened a trapdoor, and there was a young Jewish boy hiding in there. He was about 17 at the time. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he came from. And they said, well, while we're working on the farms during the day, we want you to bring him something to eat once a day. But be very, very careful that nobody sees you. And everything was fine until one day I went in there and I cleared the wood, opened the trapdoor, and handed him this pot to eat. And I was waiting for him to get done to take it back. All of a sudden, I looked up, and there were 6 German soldiers standing there, just watching me. I didn't know what to do. I was scared to death. So I grabbed the pot, put the door back down, the trap door, put the trap door down, and I thought, I'm just going to act like they're not there. And I covered it all with wood and picked up the pot, and I prayed because I knew I had to turn my back and they were going to shoot me and get everyone. As I walked away, they turned around and they walked away in the other direction. I came in the house and I was hysterical. And that incident bothered me for years and years and years, because I was so afraid that if something would happen, it would be my fault. Well, they decided to immediately move this young man. But the most amazing thing, no one ever came back. They said, oh, these soldiers will tell a superior officer, they'll come back and get all of us. But no one ever came back. So I realized even there was some kind of forgiveness, because these were soldiers drafted into the army who had families of their own and just closed their eyes to what they had seen and saved us. One evening we had been somewhere and we came back and Uncle was standing, taking off his jacket. He clasped his heart and he fell down at my feet. He had a heart attack and died. The resistance came to Aunt and said, look, we'll have to find another address for the children because you can't run the farm now. A nephew was going to come in and run the farm. So we'll find another address for them. She said, oh, no, I'm keeping them and return them to their parents. And if their parents do not return, then I will raise them myself. So my sister and I stayed. This was in January of 1944. Right after Christmas in 1945, we were in the house with Aunt, and two people came in and said, "You are leaving right now, this very minute." I remember they put us on the back of their bicycles and off we went. Went to a safe house for the night. I haven't found that farmhouse. All I remember is it had rhododendrons in front of it. And we spent the night there, and the next day they took us to another family in this little fishing village, Elburg. This family had a daughter who was, and I don't know if anyone is on here today who met Yo, but we used to stop and see her, but unfortunately she has passed away. But Yo was took care of my sister and I, but it became very, very difficult. The winter of 1944 to 1945 was the hunger winter in the Netherlands. There was no food for anyone. And I know that the people we stayed with, she would stand in line for hours to get a little piece of bread. But there was a saving grace there. This is a fishing village. And the family we stayed with, he was a fisherman. And many, many years ago, if you look at an old map of the Netherlands, it had like a huge inlet, and it was called IJsselmeer or IJssel Lake. But years before the war, the Dutch built a dam from one province to the other to close it off. And it became, well, it was, I'm sorry, I should go backtrack. It was called the North Sea. It was called the North Sea. And so the Dutch built this dam across to close it off. It became a lake, IJsselmeer. And most of the fish through the years died because it went from salt water to sweet water. So now the fishermen went out every day, but there was one particular fish that survived all this. And usually, especially with school children, I asked them, what kind of a fish do you think it was? And it's amazing. Nobody really can come up with it until one day a little boy raised his hand. He said, I know. I said, okay, what was it? He said, eel. I said, how do you know that? He said, well, I've heard you speak before. And he was right. It was eel. And that's what we survived on those months. We had heard, because people secretly at night would listen to radios. And I heard, because you were able to make radios. I don't know how it's done, but they did. But there was a curfew at 8 o'clock. Everybody better be inside. Then they checked all around the little village to make sure there were no lights on inside. Well, we had no lights, but candlelight, because from the air, the Allied planes would see the lights and know they could bomb there. So everything was pitch dark. So they, beginning to lose my train of thought. It's just hard talking to my computer, but it became very, very difficult. People were starving. There was nothing. But we had heard, because of the radios, that there had been an invasion in June of 1944 in France, and everybody had gotten their hopes up. And yes, there was, of course, and many, many of them soldiers spread out and freed Belgium, and the Allies freed the southern part of the Netherlands. But due to a lot of things that happened at the rivers going across, the Germans defended it, and there was a huge battle that went on between the Allied soldiers and the German soldiers in the Netherlands. We were north, so we knew the South was free, but we were not. It wasn't until April 19th, 1945, that we heard something that villages, they had broken through and villages were being freed. On April 19th, someone said, they just freed the village before us and they're coming. And everybody got so excited. soldiers left the village, and everybody put out their Dutch flags and wore anything orange because that's a traditional Dutch color because of the royal family, the House of Orange, and we're all celebrating in the street. We're going to be free. It's just a matter of moments, maybe. And all of a sudden, the German soldiers came back, and it was a horrible scene that happened. And everybody ran for their lives. German soldiers left again. People went out and retrieved their dead and wounded. And everybody was in the house. And I remember the house where we were living with this family was on the second floor. And from one of the windows, I could see the place where the tanks, they said, would be coming in. And all of a sudden, a truck came in with men in blue coveralls. And I said, who are they? I found out many years later, these were Dutch resistance fighters who knew that the village, because they have spies, that was safe, and gave them, the Allied forces, gave them the honor of coming into the village first. And right behind them came the Canadians. Most of the Netherlands was freed by Canadians. They came in their tanks, and I get still very emotional from that day, because that was the most wonderful day to see this and to know we were free. All of a sudden, a little boy starts running around. I'd never seen him before. And he's saying, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew. And suddenly felt he could be out there now. And no one would bother him. So it was very exciting. I don't know, do you want me to stop at this point for questions, or how would you like me to?
Maud, if you have more to share, you're welcome to keep going. I think everyone's deeply engaged in your conversation and would love to hear more. But if this is your pause to stop and get questions, we can absolutely do that as well, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, well, so now, it's kind of hard because usually I have a live audience. I've never done this before, but so they decided we should go back to Oldenbroek, to Aunt, and stay on her farm to see whether or not my parents survived. There had been nothing from my parents. And the only thing, and you will see it in the pictures that we will show you, about a letter I wrote, but which I didn't write, that someone wrote in pencil. I traced it with a pen, and it evidently was sent to my mother during the war. But anyway, not to backtrack, we went back to the farm to wait. And my parents indeed survived. I don't remember them. I remember one day on the farm, there was this couple standing there, and we were hiding behind Aunt because they wear the traditional Dutch costumes, and so did we by then. And we were hiding behind Aunt's skirt. And she gave me a shove, and she said, this is your mommy and your daddy, shake their hand. I'm now 9 years old. I didn't know them. So I went and shook their hand and ran back and hid behind her. So my parents stayed on the farm for a little bit so we could get used to them. And because they realized we had no intentions of going back with them. And then one day I said, okay, I'll make you a deal. We'll go back with you, but if we don't like you living with you, we're coming back to live with Aunt. So we went back to my hometown. Now, my parents, when my sister and I left, had no place to go. And that evening, the evening of the day that my sister and I had left, Christian friends of theirs came over and snuck in the house, and they said, well, where are the children? And my parents said, well, explained to them what had happened, that we had gone into hiding. And they said, well, where are you going to go? Obviously, they're going to come knock on your door. If you're not at the train station, they're going to check names. They have your name. And they said, we have no place to go. So they said, well, come stay with us. They lived at the edge of town and had a car dealership. I don't know if it was a Jaguar or a Ford. I'm not quite sure. But they said, come stay with us. The only problem is, they said, now my hometown was a military town, so all the bases were occupied now by German soldiers. But there were so many in my hometown that many officers just went to somebody's house, knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, and said, we're giving you 3 days to get out of here. It's now my house. And so they said they lived in the apartment above the, in the front was the showroom and the back was the service area for cars. And above that was their apartment. And they said there's 2 German officers living in one of our bedrooms. But my parents, what were they going to do? So they said yes. So they packed a few things, left everything in the house that we owned, locked the door, and went to stay with them. Now, my parents lived in their attic for 3 years. My dad could never, ever go outside because he would be recognized. It's still my hometown, and you couldn't trust anyone. So my dad could never go outside. My mother, it was very difficult for her because Dutch was a new language for her, but she dressed as a nurse and went out to try and find food for them, for all 4 of them. And sometimes because of the German soldiers in all around, and she would hear what they would be talking about or whatever, that she also delivered messages for the resistance. So my dad also, at this time, any young man who was walking on the street was just grabbed and shipped to Germany to work in the factories. So many Christian Dutch young men were also hiding. But by some reason, my parents survived, and they found out their children were still alive too. And they were able, it took them a long time to get where we were. Now, the aftermath of a war, all the bridges were blown up. Everybody was suffering from malnutrition. The only thing that moved in the country was trucks with food for everyone. It was a very, very difficult time, but somehow they hitchhiked and got to the farm to meet their children. The rest of my family is gone. My German grandparents had no place to go. My Dutch grandfather was able to convince the Nazis that he could hire an ambulance because they all got the notice to go to the train station, and to hire an ambulance to get his wife from the hospital to Amsterdam, because all the trains were going to Amsterdam, where they had created a Jewish quarter where they were throwing everybody in. And they allowed him to have an ambulance to take his wife, my Dutch grandmother, to Amsterdam. She died in Amsterdam in January of 1942. So it was shortly after she got there. My grandfather and my German grandparents, my father had a sister. She was married. I had 3 little cousins about the same age as my sister and I. They all perished. They were all taken to Amsterdam. From there, they were taken to Westerbork. Remember, I talked about Westerbork in the beginning, the area that the Dutch had set up for all the German Jewish refugees who had come. Well, when the Germans invaded the country, they said, oh, look at this. We have all these Jews right here. Put a fence around it. It became the biggest transit camp in the Netherlands. From there, many, many Jews went to Auschwitz. But also 19 trains went to Sobibor, a death camp in Poland. My whole family was taken from Westerbork to Sobibor and murdered there, all of them, the same day they arrived. I have a book here published by the Dutch Red Cross with the names of, and of course, as I had said earlier, the Jews kept very, very, very accurate records. And so now they have most of those records, because there were 140,000 Jews living in the Netherlands when the war broke out. 107,000 were deported. 5,200 survived from the death camps. 24,000 Jews went into hiding. Can you imagine? 16,000 were not discovered. And the Netherlands had the highest percentage of Jews who were deported and perished. 75% of our Jewish population perished, more than any other Western European country. Now I'll stop because more will come out, I think, by me answering questions probably, or Jackie or Shauna or Sarah, anyone have anything to add?
No, Maud, thank you so much. If you're ready for questions and you feel this is a great place to kind of pause and to start them, we're happy to do that for you.
Sure, that'll be fine.
Okay. Oh, and Maud, I was very graciously corrected in saying that I should tell you that there are middle school, high school, undergraduate, and graduate students here. So they are very honored to be here with you today. You're getting a lot of positive feedback and support in the chat, which I know you can't see, but I can download it for you later. So if you're okay with the question,
Sure.
we can start those right now. So I'm going to ask a question from a high school student, and they said, not being able to trust people, do you, from your perspective, believe it was hard to trust those who helped you and your family?
No, I don't. I don't quite understand the whole question. Did I trust the people who were taking care of me?
Yeah, so I think the question is saying, during this time, it was very hard to trust people. So when people were trying to help you, did you feel you could trust them?
The people that I know, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be very careful because it could be your next door neighbor who you have known for years and years, and a lot of people, there was a price on our head too.
Mm-hmm.
That if you turned in, let's say, they found 3 Jews and it's okay, you get paid for 3. Or were given food because we had the hunger winter. There was no food. So people, for self-preservation, I guess, just turned on other people.
Thank you, Maud. Our next question is, how long was it before you were able to speak about what you experienced?
I think I explained that right in the beginning. I never talked about it. And that's so interesting too, because I have something that I'm just going to read this real quick because I think that will explain why many people have experiences like this just don't talk about it. You hear all the time of grandchildren finding out their grandparents, what they went through. So this was written by Sharon Cohen. It says, after liberation, hidden child survivors of the Holocaust entered into a second phase of silence. During the war, in order to hide one's Jewish identity, children learned silence as a survival technique, a behavior that was transferred to their post-war environment. For many children, their age at the time of persecution was particularly important, as in many instances, the ability to speak about the past was dependent on the child survivor's ability to recall the events. And, it's so true because my parents never spoke about it. After the war, my parents, to the day they died, did not know some of the horrible things we've witnessed as children or things that happened to us. They never asked. They never. And my mother was very upset when she found out that I had started to speak. And I explained in the beginning, it was because of what I had seen on 60 Minutes, a letter in response to a story about Raoul Wallenberg. And that's when I started to speak because I felt I had to. But my mother found out and she said she was very upset with me. Why are you doing this? It's going to happen again. And maybe not in your lifetime, but your children or grandchildren. It is that fear that still exists today. But I felt I had to speak. And as years have gone on, more and more people, thank goodness, have spoken about their experiences during the Second World War. And that includes also liberators who liberated the camps of what they saw, something that was so hard to describe. Okay?
Yes, thank you, Maud. We have about 2 pages full of questions, so I'm just trying to go through and see which ones. So one of our high school students wants to know, you mentioned in the beginning, Maud, that you didn't know how to speak English. She wants to know how you learned English and were you willing to let someone teach you after having been through so much?
Well, what happened, we came to the United States in April of 1950, and it was very difficult. My father, we were sponsored, some of my mother's relatives from Germany had, when in the 30s, they saw what was happening and living in Germany. Many of them went to then Palestine, and some were able to get to the United States. And my mother's relatives, an uncle of hers who lives in the United States, found out we were still alive and offered to sponsor us as immigrants to come to the United States. Excuse me. So that's how we came to the United States. And in order to immigrate, you also had to have a job. And they got my father a job at the Astor Hotel. It's now the Marquis on Times Square, as a busboy. And we lived in a rooming house in Manhattan. That's how we started. And it wasn't until June when we were able to leave the rooming house and we rented an apartment that I started school. And in Queens, New York, PS 154. And it was very difficult because I had no knowledge of English. The principal was wonderful, and the people really helped, and I made some new friends. And before I know it, this was June, all of a sudden it was vacation here, and you all have like the whole summer off. So my sister and I went to the movie theater every day. It was at that time 25 cents, it's all relative. And we saw every movie. And at that time you could go into the movie theater and stay there all day and just keep watching. You know, it would have a newsreel, a cartoon, feature film, and it would start all over again. First of all, we were happy because it was cool in there. It was very hot in this country. But by the time we came back to school in September, both of us were able to speak some English of what we had learned being in the movie theater. So I was in the 4th grade when I was 14 years old, when I first started school in June. So when I came to school in September, they put me in the 5th grade because I was doing so much better. And from between September and January, September 1950 and January 1951, I went through 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in high school. We don't have a 7th and 8th grade in the Netherlands. So what I had learned in the Netherlands, even though I started school in the Netherlands at age 9, I had the knowledge to go into high school, and I went into high school. And in high school, I have friends who I'm still friends with today, who every day on the way to school would teach me a new word. And my vocabulary was very limited, but that's how I learned English and learned to speak it without much of an accent. And by the way, there was no ESL, English for Second Learners, anything like that at that time, not for Dutch anyway.
Thank you, Maud. Maud, our next question is, did or does your sister remember her experiences? And if so, does or did she talk about them?
My sister remembers some things. She doesn't remember much of it at all. She just remembers some of the terrible things that we experienced that had left a mark on her. But otherwise, no, she doesn't. She was only, 4.5 years old at that time. And what she just remembers some things, but not everything. I was her mother for those years, and I protected her, and I don't think she was too young. I don't remember everything either. There's no way I could, but some things always stand out in your mind. And just by speaking about it, it's like a DVD running in my head because I'm describing something that I'm seeing in my head. So it's difficult, and sometimes other things come out that I may have not thought about that suddenly appear. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Our next question is, has anyone apologized to you?
No. What do you mean by?
I'm not sure exactly. It's a question from the group, but they wanted to know, has anyone truly apologize to you, to tell them that they're sorry for what had happened to you?
No, I don't think so. No.
Thank you. Someone also wants to know, what is your relationship to Judaism today?
Well, what happened, I came from a very Orthodox home, as you can imagine, with my grandfather having been a former cantor. And during the war, of course, there was no kosher food. You ate whatever you could eat. And after the war, we came back. My parents did not keep a kosher household anymore. They did not belong to the synagogue. It's interesting to note that after those who survived, there were two. One is that became very religious and may not have ever have been religious or continued. And those who were religious who just didn't follow anything anymore. My mother told me many times that she is Jewish, will always be Jewish, and she believes in God, but she is scared that this is going to happen again. That's why she was so afraid of my speaking. My mother is probably looking down on me now, especially since PBS did a documentary about my story, and she's probably saying, why? But to me, it's important to share. And so I was brought up as a Christian, a very devout Christian during the war. So I was a little conflicted between the two. And right after the war, when we were back with my parents, we said, oh, we want to go to church on Sunday. So my parents took us. So we were going to church. And then I said, well, why are you not going to church? And then my mother said, well, because we're Jewish. Well, but I didn't know what that meant. I know through all these years, you never say that because they kill you for saying that or being that. So then I said, well, I'm interested. So I went on Wednesday afternoons. We didn't have school in the Netherlands on Wednesday afternoons. I went to Hebrew school to learn Hebrew and learn more about the Jewish faith.
Thank you, Maud. Okay, our next question is, during the year, how many talks do you give? And have you been to the Holocaust Memorial Museums in Europe and the United States? And does any museum stand out to you?
Wow, that's a big question. I have no idea in the last, since 1982, how many times I've spoken. I've traveled quite a bit. I've seen many, many museums and memorials. I think the one museum that has a very special, it's very special to me. And I think those of you who are listening who've been on the trip with me in Elburg, there was a synagogue there. And it stood empty for many years after the war. And one of my friends, now my friend, is a teacher, a history teacher in the school there. And he decided they should make this synagogue a museum for the residents who lived in the little village, or many Jews who lived there in surrounding areas. And they have done a beautiful job in making this museum. It's only the second synagogue museum, the other being in Amsterdam, that in the Netherlands. And it's very meaningful to me. And I've also helped them in supporting them because they constantly are adding new things to it. But that museum in Elburg, it's called Schul Elburg, is very, very special. You can look it up online too.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry these questions are back and forth, Ma. They're just how we
right.
with the time. Someone wants to know, what is your relationship with your sister?
We're fine. We've always been very close. We're sisters. We shared this that no one else shared, and no one really knows everything that has happened, but she and I.
Thank you. A lot of people were wondering about the men that let you go. I've received a few questions asking, why do you think that they let you go?
Well, I think that they are, they weren't, not there were many soldiers, and many of them, this, especially towards the end of the war, they were like 18, 19-year-olds, because they were losing so many that they were now taking all the Hitler Youth kids who, 18, 19, 20. But these were older men. And I think they were just, their fathers, and couldn't do anything to a child, or really didn't want to see who was hiding there. And I think that says something about how people cared. They cared enough to never talk about what they had seen. And who knows how many more Jews they saved. But they saved that young man and myself that day. But I think it's just, they weren't all Nazis like Hitler and his cohorts. These were just soldiers and could not do anything about what they had seen. They just let it go.
Thank you, Maud. Maud, a high school student would like to know, how does your experiences during the Holocaust change your view of humanity?
Well, I think that's kind of a hard question too. I have faith in humanity, because I think, like, look at what we're dealing with right now and how people are stepping forward, how people stepped forward for 9/11. Unfortunately, between 9/11 and the crisis we're going through now, things started to change again. But there is a lot of good in humanity. And I think more good than those who are not good. But I have faith in humanity. I truly, truly do. And I think by all of us sharing our stories is so important too, especially for students, to say, look, we have to care for each other. We're only here once. And so I have total faith in humanity, especially again now.
Wow, thank you, Maud, so much. Okay, I think we're gonna ask just a couple more questions, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
We have one question from a teacher in the audience who wants to know, what changes to Holocaust education would you suggest for teachers and administrators?
What changes would I suggest?
Yes, please.
I'm not a teacher. I'm on the Holocaust Commission, and the commission at the time, years ago, we were the ones who developed the curriculum, the Holocaust curriculum, made it mandatory in the state for Holocaust education. I think New Jersey, especially New Jersey, is doing a wonderful job. I can't think of adding or taking off anything at this point. And it just, I'm so surprised of the things I hear, because I'm in other states too, and look at New Jersey as a model for their teachers and what we're doing and what the teachers can also experience by going to the Holocaust sites. So no, I think we're perfect. Well, nobody is perfect, but there probably will be times, and I think we'll probably will be looking at our curriculum again, because it's a living document that you have to look at and see what you want to change, what you want to add. So no, I have no problem with New Jersey.
Thank you. A question that came in wanted to know if you felt that you had to mature very quickly, and if so, what was that like for you when you were actually in ages of maturity?
Well, it was very hard, because, at 6.5, I suddenly had to grow up. Probably, trying to think back, not fully understanding everything, but knowing I had that responsibility. And I had that responsibility even after we were back with my parents for my sister, because my sister wouldn't listen to anyone but me. So it's just, I don't know. It's kind of a hard question. Tell me again, because I'm thinking off track here. What was the question?
It was, how did it feel to have to mature very quickly?
Oh, yeah. I matured very quickly, and I found that out, and I saw that all through even my adolescence, of things that my friends thought was so important. And I had totally different thoughts because I experienced so much. I had grown up, and my thoughts were so much older than the age I was. So I think it's helped a great deal. And yes, it gave me a lot of responsibilities that I had to deal with. And I grew up very fast.
Maud, that kind of brings us into another question. Someone wanted to know, when you were in school in the US, did you tell any of your friends about your experiences?
No. No one asked. I don't know, something had come up in class once, I think when I was still those few months in elementary school, and I said something and the teacher didn't believe me, you know, because we must have been talking about the Second World War. I don't remember exactly what it was, but no, I did not tell anyone. Later on, I had some very good friends and I told them, and of course I got married, I have children, and my children have always known the story. And when I first started speaking, I went to my daughters, my youngest ones, twins, and their teacher asked me to come and speak to the class. And my twin daughters were a little upset because they weren't supposed to be in the same class, but they were, that I would find that out. But and that was one of the first places I started to speak about it. But then it wasn't until 1982 when I really became public about it. And it's interesting because Kean University also has a special meaning to me, because it was there in 1982 that then Governor Kean signed signed an executive order creating the Advisory Council for Holocaust Education. And he did this at Kean, which eventually became the Holocaust Commission, but it was signed at Kean University. And I found it ironic 75 years later, then I'm speaking from Kean.
Thank you, Maud, and we so greatly appreciate that you're speaking to all of us today, not only just from the Kean community, from the national community as well. Maud, if I may, our next question is, what are your thoughts about Germany today?
I have no problem with Germany today, because and it was so true. I listened to a program last night where someone said, this is the third generation, and most of the people today are ashamed of what their forefathers did. I can't blame them. So I have no problem with Germany at all.
Thank you. One of our first questions was, did you ever contact or come to resolution with your neighbor who had written Holocaust Denial for 60 Minutes?
It was very interesting because I happened to tell a reporter about this, and we have a local weekly paper, and she wrote a story about politics makes strange bedfellows. And what it was that this woman who wrote this, I found out, was a German war bride. And she and her husband were working for a man running for mayor from my political party. And I went public. That's why it said politics makes strange bedfellows. I went public and supported the candidate for mayor of the other party, saying that if this candidate has these people working for him and what I have been through, I want nothing to do with him. And the other won. And that was my first public statement.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Maud, we're going to do 2 more questions just for our sake of time, and we want to see your photos. So, Maud, someone started with, I've heard from several other Dutch survivors that they were taken into hiding by fellow citizens. Why do you think so many Dutch people were willing to hide Jews when it seems like so many others were not?
Well, I think you have that in every country. in Europe, where in Western Europe especially, where each country had many people who were willing to risk their lives to save someone else, but also people there who were collaborating. So I think, and where we were, as I said, it was a very religious area, and the Dutch is very religious, the areas, and I think that's where most of those people took in. And I remember going back, my sister and I, and met a woman who remembers us from that time. And she was just so happy to see us. And as we were leaving, now these people they're very poor, they had nothing, they're not well educated, but she turned around as we were leaving, gave us a hug and said shalom. And it made me cry, because I realized they felt we were also all God's children, no matter what. And they helped. But as I said, there were so many people who helped in so many countries.
Thank you, Maud. Maud, there are so many questions left, and I'm happy to send them to you so that you can go over them later, and perhaps, we can discuss them with the participants in the email correspondence that I send out later. But our last question is, Maud, what do you like to end your presentations with? What do you want those that are with us or with you at your presentations, what do you want them to take away?
I usually read a poem. Is there time for it?
Yes, of course.
It says, what will become of all the memories? I'm a very tired, old, and worn out man, and my eyes have long been blind. Most things that people say to me just seem to slip my mind. Oh, but the suffering and painful times that were in years long gone are still as clear upon my memory as the numbers on my arm. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? Who will stand before the world knowing what to say when the very last survivor fades away? When I hold my grandson close to me and his fingers trace the pattern of my tears, and he asks me, Grandpa, tell me, why do you cry? What is it that you fear? And I tell him, once there was another child who smelled as sweet and felt as warm, but he was taken from before my eyes, and only I remain to mourn. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter in the dust in the breeze? Who will stand before the world that now wishes to deny? Will they believe in someone who never heard the cries? What can I say or do to make things change? Time has a way of passing by so fast, and like a fleeting shadow, no one will recall the faces of the past. What will become of all the memories? Are they to scatter with the dust in the breeze? But one thought gives me comfort. It's all that I have left. I know the children, they won't forget. We won't forget. Please don't forget.
Wow, Mom, that was beautiful. Thank you. Where can educators find that poem?
Well, it was written by a student, because I'm also involved with another organization called the March of the Living, who take students and adults to Poland and Israel every year. And the students this was a student who wrote this. I have a copy of it. I can send it to you.
That is absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure that was an incredible student. I can't imagine having read that the first time and really taking that all in. So thank you. All right, Maud, if it's okay with you, is it all right if I bring up your presentation and you can tell me when you want me to change the slide?
Okay.
Okay. 1 second.
Okay.
Okay. Just trying to see.
This is the star that I had to wear, and you see the JOOD in there.
Oh.
This was just a list of the number of Jews who lived in those various countries. And you can see the Netherlands. The Netherlands is on there, 140. Okay. This is a picture of me as a little girl just before the war. This is a picture of my family, my mother, my father, my sister, and myself, that was taken, I think, probably in 1941, maybe a year before we went into hiding. I'm the one with the lovely hairdo. Okay. This is a composite picture of my immediate family. To the top left is my Dutch grandfather and grandmother. To the right are my German grandfather and grandmother. Below that is my aunt, my father's sister, her husband, and my 3 little cousins. All of them perished except my Dutch grandmother on the top left, perished in Sobibor. This is a picture, well, you can tell by the cars, very old, of the train station in Amersfoort. Doesn't look like this anymore, but that's what it looked like. Next. This is at the train station, and that is the building that you see is it says the outer term, that was the restaurant that my grandfather owned. This, as you can tell by the cars, I took sometime later. The next picture is, now we couldn't go to school. I had started kindergarten, but no Jewish child could go to public school. This was in 1941, in the summer of 41 when I started school. We could not go to school anymore. So some of the mothers and the Jewish teachers, because all Jewish teachers, principals, everybody who worked in the school district who was Jewish was fired. So some of the teachers and the mothers got together and rented some rooms in a building to try and continue our education. Go to the next. That's my sister and I were both there. And all the way to the right, you see a woman with her hand in front of a little boy there on the right-hand corner. I just met up again with this little boy. It's amazing because we're all in our 80s now, but we were able to reconnect. Okay, next. These were the material that my mother had to buy with the stars that you had to cut out and sew on your clothing. This is a picture you can see with children wearing the stars. This is a picture of the Western European countries, not all, because, well, Turkey's in there too. But it should say the Netherlands, not Holland, but that's okay. This is a picture of where the Jews lived in around May 1941, the Jewish area in Amsterdam. This was taken in that area. It was not a ghetto. It wasn't closed off, sealed off like in Poland, in Warsaw. No, and it says on top in German, Jewish quarter, and Dutch, Jewish quarter. And you can see stores boarded up and all the people. This was at one of the transit camps. As you can see, the barbed wire and people there. The Nazis did not like the names of our streets. And, you know, in most communities, they relate to former important people or politicians. So what they did, they took down all the street signs and put up all street signs in German. The same with the concentration camps. Auschwitz is a German name for Auschwitz. And so many of these places had the names of their cities, but it was all changed to German names. These are people just getting off the trolley cars with their stuff, going to a building in Amsterdam. It was a theater. It was called the Schouwburg. And they made it like a holding place where people had to spend days before they were taken from there to the train station and ultimately to the concentration camps. These are people in Westerbork. And you notice mostly women and children boarding the freight trains to go to the concentration camps. You all know who this is, Anne Frank and her house. Here she is again, writing her diary, which I'm sure most of you have read. Well, during the war, next one, during the war, evidently Tani, or aunt, took us to a photographer to have our picture taken. Some of these pictures I've gotten of my childhood and all back from people who had them, because my mother destroyed everything. So this was taken at a photographer, and you can tell the clothes barely fit us. Next. And evidently that same day she had a picture taken of us with her. This is a picture of Uncle. This is a picture of Tiny, or aunt's brother. He was the wooden shoemaker, but he also could barely hear. What he has in his hand there is the hearing aids of the 1940s that you had to shout in so he could hear you. This picture I found in a book that was published from the area of where many Jews were saved, and I discovered my sister and I are in this picture. The next. This is the farmhouse, not the way it looks now, because since then it's been renovated, but this was the farmhouse where we lived the first part of the war in Oldebroek. And here you can see to the left, that green building is where he made his Oom Evert, or Uncle Evert, made his wooden shoes. Behind that, you see another roof, and that's the barn. And in back of that barn was where the young Jewish boy was hiding. Now, this was a note that I wrote. Evidently, I vaguely remember something, but I could neither read or write. And evidently somebody gave me a piece of paper, had something written in pencil. I couldn't read it, and gave me a pen and a bottle of ink, and I traced all these letters. And then when it was dry, they erased the pencil, and the resistance would check up on us often, and they gave the carrier that letter, and it got to my mother and father, and it says, "Dear Mommy and Daddy, we like it here very much, but we want to be free. And we'd very much like to see you again when we come back. I'm helping Aunt milk the cows. I want to become a farmer's girl. The teacher is giving us lessons, and I can read already a little." And then it says that where we were sleeping, because I noticed, and then at the end it said, "So long, goodbye, Margie and Rika Spronk." Now, when that very first night when I arrived on the farm, they also told me that I had a different name. So since we were their nieces, their last name was Spronk. So now we became Spronk, and the name Maud, in Dutch it's Maud, was not very common. They made it Margie or Margie. And Rita became Rika. So it's signed Margie and Rika Sprunk. And I realized that because in the letter, I say that Uncle had died. So I know this was written sometime in January of 1944. So my parents knew at that point that we were still alive. Okay. In the Netherlands, also near where we were hidden, there were many Jews being hidden in the woods. They built them these huts, and they had it all camouflaged. And the whole village took care of the Jews who were living in there. And on certain days, certain places, they would leave food for them. And they had to be very careful because German soldiers would go into the woods to hunt. They have wild boar there, and they were hunting the boar. And one day, one of the little boys who was hiding there was outside. A German soldier spotted him and couldn't figure out what he was doing there and shot in the air. And that's how they were discovered. Many of them were saved because the villagers hid the people. They ran away, hid them, but some of them did die. And there's a big memorial, and it's one of the places we also visit on our summer Holocaust Commission study tour. This is in the village of Elburg. On the second floor is where we were living. It's me standing in front of that house. Next. Now, this is, again, the house on the top left, and I show where the window, and this is from that window, what I saw where the tanks came in on those cobblestone streets on April 19th, 1945. This is Yo, the daughter of the second family, and her late husband. Unfortunately, she has also passed away. And that was NJN PBS doing my documentary film. This was the place where my parents were hidden. By the time I got that picture, it had already been boarded up, but it's now totally gone. An apartment house is there, but this is where my parents were hiding. Next. And we stopped there with the bus before the building was destroyed, and all the way on the top where you see that with the sliding glass, in that attic my parents hid for 3 years. Okay. This is a watchtower at Camp Vught in the Netherlands. It was also a huge camp, concentration camp. Next. This is my sister and I after the war studying, because it was very difficult. First of all, I spoke a dialect, and when I got to school, people made fun of me because it's now in the city. I'd never been to school. I'm 9.5 years old, and I was in the first grade. Okay. This is a picture of me now and then. Next. I worked for Pan American World Airways, and this is Henry Fonda signing a book. This is a picture of my husband and I. Okay, those are the pictures. But in my book, it has many, many, many more pictures. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Maud. Can everyone turn their mics on real quick and give Maud a round of applause?
Yay! Love you, Maud.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maud.
Thank you.
See you, Maud.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I
you.
just, can I just read one more thing before we go?
Absolutely.
And I end with this. Now, it's you know, there's a lot to my story, and it's very hard to tell it in a very few minutes, but I want to read this. This is a quote by Elie Wiesel.
Hang on 1 second, Maud. Sorry. Hang on. We gotta find your. Okay. Ooh.
Well, there's one more thing I wanted to read. It's very, my story goes on, and I think those of you who have heard me speak, or especially have traveled with me, heard much, much more. There's so much more to my story, but this is a quote from Elie Wiesel. To those who lost their lives, we remember. To those who survived, we hear you. To those of the next generation, we must never forget. Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be with all of you today.
Oh, thank you so much. So good to see you and hear from you.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
Okay, thank you. So before everyone signs off quickly, just want to, again, thank Maud so much for her time and for being here with us today and for being so adaptive with this online platform. Maud, you did more than amazing. It was incredible. Thank you so much. We have everyone's questions that we're happy to share with Maud and, to go over at a later time. We will be sending everyone an email afterwards. So if you received the link to Zoom from one of your colleagues or teachers, please just ask them to share the resources with you, or you can share with us your email, and we're happy to send you those resources as well. Thank you again for taking the time to be here. One thing that we want to kindly ask of all of you is, in order to continue to honor Maud, what we would like in response, if possible, is for all of you to take a photo of yourself with a candle, lighting a candle in honor of Yom HaShoah. We are going to be doing a virtual Yom HaShoah commemoration on April 20th, similar to this, and we would like to feature you in that commemoration in honor of Maud. So if you have a candle and you can just take a picture of yourself or your family or you and whomever you have, it could be just you, and send it over to me via email. I'm happy to put you in that presentation so that we can continue to commemorate and remember together. So again, thank you all so much for being here. We're really just so thankful to have all of you in your presence and to have Maud with us today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me, and I'm happy to share that with you. Otherwise, I thank you so much for your time today. We can continue to wish Maud well and send our goodbyes. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and continue to stay safe. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maud.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Paul.
Very much.
Hi, Shanna.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before I forget, I just want to let everyone know that this conversation today was recorded. So if your students are interested in watching this at another time, I can send out the recording to you upon request. I'll drop my email in the chat before you go, and you can share this with your students.
Also, I'm available to speak to any of the classes after I'm no longer housebound.
God. I'm sure a lot of educators are going to take you up on that.
That's fine.
Thank you so much, Maud, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jackie, Shauna, and Sarah, for making sure that this could happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Fine. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good,